I'm delighted today to welcome Oz Katerji. He is a British-Lebanese journalist who's been reporting on the conflict in Ukraine pretty much from the start, where we'll kick off in a minute and ask him questions about his experience doing that. He is also a filmmaker and has made the extraordinary film, The Battle for Kiev. And again, when we get into this, I'll make sure to ask how we can actually watch that film, whether it's available for streaming and so on. I think along with 20 Days in Mariupol, it's an absolutely essential film to watch to understand what is going on in Ukraine. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please, if you get to the end of this video and you like what we do, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any other episodes. We also list validated Ukrainian charities in the description of the video. And as I do in each one, I implore you please to support those. It's incredibly important to help Ukraine remain resilient at this time. Oz, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I've looked forward to speaking to you for some time. I've been an avid observer of your reporting. And of course, as I said, the film is fantastic. Well, let's start with that. Where can people see it? Is it still available on streaming? And then we'll get into the motivations for making the film and, of course, its impact.
So the film hasn't been officially released yet. We're hoping to release it at some point later on this year. If you're listening, it'll be 2024. We are hoping that it will be released, before Christmas. But yeah, so at the moment we're touring the film at some film festivals. We are playing at the Portland Film Festival in October. So that will be the international premiere for the film. And then after that, we'll start trying to nail down a release date. So best way to check in is just to check on my social medias. You'll find me at Oz Keri at basically every social media platform, and I'll keep everyone informed as to the actual release date. For now, you can see the trailer by going on my Twitter. It's the first pinned post on there. You'll be able to watch it there.
Fantastic. And I think the motivations almost certainly are obvious when people look at your stream, look at the highly balanced reporting that you do and comments you make, not just on Ukraine, but on what is happening in the Middle East. I think they'll understand the context. How difficult, though, was it planning and actually sort of executing, as it were, the film, getting it made, getting it done?
Yeah, I mean, this is my first film, and I'm a debut filmmaker. I have made much smaller films for TV, for online, for say Vice News, but nothing at the scale of feature length before. And I was, although I might have been a critical component of that, it wasn't a solo project as this film was. I was the director, the producer, you name it, I did it. So yeah, that was a big learning process for me. Will be learning the tools of the trade, how to be a filmmaker, as it were, from the ground up, basically. A lot of the things that I'd learned how to make videos were specifically for one market, that's news broadcast. And you very quickly realize that those quick kind of 2.5 minute, 2 minute videos that you make for news do not translate into a plus 60 minutes experience. So the training that I'd had for my entire career up to that point was not useless for me. How to hold a camera, etc., was still important, but the process of putting together a film of that length was something that I'd never even thought of before. So I had to learn a lot of things by doing. And yeah, so I was basically writing and reporting throughout the beginning of the war in Ukraine. I came on the February 14th, 2022. That's 10 days before the full-scale invasion. I arrived in Kiev. And I started work. And as I was working, as I was going to report, I also took my video camera with me. I wasn't selling the footage that I was using. I was recording on the camera because I was selling my writing. I was doing radio, etc. So at the end of it, I had 3 months worth of footage that I had accumulated during the story of what happened in Kiev, and then when I got back to the UK, took a rest after the Kiev was liberated. I stayed for another month or so, then came back to the UK and had a rest, and then the process of trying to drum up interest because I felt like I wasn't capable of putting together all of my footage and making it a film all on my own without kind of external help. I especially felt I needed like a fresh set of eyes to do the edit. I think it's a kind of really bad practice for you to edit your own footage. You really need filmmaking's a collaborative process. So what I was trying to do at that point is drum up interest to try and see if I could put together a small bit of funding enough to, put together the film. And that process took forever, really. As much interest as there was in my work as a journalist for writing or for doing broadcast hits, trying to find investment for a film, a feature-length film even, was something I'd never attempted before. And, all of my contacts who are editors at magazines or newspapers or whatever suddenly aren't useful to me when I'm trying to, move into the kind of film market, which was completely alien to me when I stepped into it. It's still mostly alien to me now. But yeah, that's it. Eventually, I managed to convince Byline Media, who are a small production company in the UK. They just made John Sweeney's film, which I saw, and I saw, well, they've made this film. Maybe they'd be interested in taking a look at mine. And they were, and they commissioned it. And then we went through the edit process from the end of 2023 onwards. So really, there was kind of no movement on the film from April 2022 till the summer 2023, like a big, long, over a year gap between starting production and actually filming all of the footage that would then make up the final film. So yeah, look, it's also been frustrating trying to get some of the rights clearances that I need to actually put the film out there. Otherwise, it would have been probably released much sooner. So I know like lots of people are desperate to see the film, and it hasn't quite been released yet. But it is coming, and it's finished. We premiered it in London in April. Got some really good reviews out of that. So yeah, it's still the same film it was in April. It hasn't had any major changes to it. And we're just looking forward to releasing it this year and seeing, what the film festivals make of it. I'm really looking forward to that, and really looking forward to being a first-time director at a film festival.
Even more important now, given the Russians at war, dare I say it, sort of propaganda film, and the controversy, of course, surrounding how it was made, who made it, the funding behind it. I think especially important to get a film like yours out. How important is it for you to try to project an impartial voice? Because I think when people check out your stream, that comes across extremely clearly, that you're clearly trying to sort of, cut through the fog of war, cut through the noise of propaganda, counter propaganda, and so on, and try to present what's going on the ground. How important is it, but also equally, how difficult is it to get independent voices like yours out there into the mainstream media?
Well, I think for me, the biggest thing of that Russians at War scandal is the fact that it received 350,000 Canadian dollars from the Canadian government in grants to make the film. You could have made my film 8 or 9 times over with the amount of money that Canada spent on that. And most of that money was crowdfunded or generated, without external, support. No big companies, no government stepped in to help make the film. In fairness, I didn't apply for any of those types of grants. So you could say, well, it's on me for not applying, but I didn't even think to apply for those kinds of grants for my film. And that a Russian filmmaker can feel so just comfortable applying. There's no, making a propaganda film, a Leni Riefenstahl film for Putin's Russian soldiers is one thing, but doing it by applying for a government grants from one of Ukraine's allies to do it, it's just like an extra layer of disgusting that the filmmaker, I don't want to waste much of my breath speaking about this person, but in interviews, it's clear that they don't even recognize that there's anything wrong with what they've done. And I think you have to be so just embedded in regime propaganda to reach that point where you are just completely indifferent to the reality of what you are actually doing. Like I'm very objective in my journalism, in what I report. If I see something, I see it, I report it as I saw it. But I don't ever pretend that makes me neutral on the subjects that I'm covering. Um, I would never do that, because I think that's a preposterous idea, and I don't buy any reporter claiming to be a completely neutral voice on any conflict, because I know reporters and none of them are neutral. So I mean, maybe they'd argue that they were, but you're not neutral to the suffering of innocent people. You can be neutral between, two warring factions that are just as bad as each other. But when you come to a place like Ukraine and see, a peaceful democratic nation being attempting to have its sovereignty and nationhood, its very statehood, erased by fascist imperialism, it's very, if you claim to be neutral on that, then you're actually saying a lot more about your own morals than you are about the kind of ethics of journalism. My job as a filmmaker, as a journalist, is to bear witness to something and to report what happened, the truth of it. It's not to come and put a veneer on it because I support one side or another. So I do that even though I'm objective, and I'm disclosing that I support the Ukrainian people in the defense of their homeland. And I think it's very dishonest for people to feel one way or the other and not disclose it, as this Russian filmmaker is clearly doing, because it's not an anti-war film to tell the story of how the invaders are all just ordinary people caught up in something. They have a choice. They have a choice not to violate Ukraine, to kill and murder Ukrainian civilians and citizens. They have a choice not to do that, and they choose to do that, and they get paid to do that. And I think that that film and what it's attempting to do is, yeah, as I said, it's Leni Riefenstahl-esque in its purposes. It's trying to glorify and whitewash the image and launder the reputation of the people that are the oppressor. They are the oppressor in this situation, and it's trying to launder the image of the oppressor. And my work is about telling the story of the oppressed. So if that makes me partisan, then that's a label I'm willing to live with, as long as I am sticking true to the ethics of my trade that I learned in mainstream news journalism for the entirety of my career. I would never report a lie. I would never do so. And yeah, I cannot even compare my film with its no funding and its, scope with what was attempted to be done with Canadian taxpayer money. It makes me, I think I've said enough about that.
You've also chosen to stay in Ukraine. And of course, after the Battle of Kiev and when the Russians were pushed out, there were a huge number of foreign correspondents at that point when it was, quotes, interesting. Then as we get into what was labeled very much in the media as the stalemate period, I never sort of quite bought into that description. But I think talking to some correspondents, there was a huge exodus of reporters moving on to other things. And of course, when the Middle East flared up to some extent, that took a lot of the oxygen out of Ukraine reporting. But you have opted to stay there and carry on reporting the story. What is your motivations, and why do you think this is the story that needs to be covered in such depth and without a break?
I mean, it's still the biggest story in the world, as important. And I'm Lebanese, British-Lebanese, so as close to my heart as what's happening in Lebanon, in occupied Palestine, in Israel, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. I, I came to Ukraine to tell a story, and that story is not finished being told yet, and I'm not going to just up and abandon Ukraine to go back to the Middle East. I spent a lifetime covering war in the Middle East, and I could easily go back to it, but I feel that I owe the Ukrainians to stick around and to keep telling their story, even when some of the news media their attention is elsewhere. That doesn't mean I think that the media is doing a bad job in telling the story of Ukraine. I'm critical of the media often, but I do think they have maintained a relative focus on the story here, particularly when major events happen here. However, being a foreign correspondent often means you have to go where the interest is, because that's where you earn your living. And I've had that lifestyle, and I've done that for a living, and I'm a Ukraine correspondent now, not just a sort of roving foreign correspondent. So it's I take my job seriously, and that means having to concentrate on this even when I personally would maybe want to go to the Middle East, would want to go to my home country of Lebanon and do some reporting there. But the reality is, I've got a job to do here in Ukraine, and that's why I'm staying. It's not for any kind of I don't want to make it too much like a moral crusade type thing. I'm not really here for any of those reasons. It's just my job now is Ukraine correspondent, and I take that very seriously. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm not leaving the moment there's places I know I could sell my work from otherwise. So yeah, I'm in Ukraine for the foreseeable. I don't know how long that will be, but for now, I'm very much committed to being in Ukraine.
And other correspondents, such as John Sweeney, Philip Ittner, and others, they've had to essentially remove themselves from the media mainstream in order to carry on doing the kind of reporting they want. I think part of this seems to be because they see a pattern in this conflict, not simply a war between Ukraine and Russia, or Russia and Ukraine, to put it more accurately, but a wider conflict between autocracy and democracy, and much bigger, longer term forces at play, which I would tend to agree with. But I describe myself as an activist as opposed to a journalist. Is it difficult within the confines of the mainstream media, both TV and print media, to zoom out and look at these sort of bigger ideological kind of issues, which often may well be seen as more partisan in some ways?
Personally speaking, it's quite a weird one for me, because I'm someone who's never really quite fit the mainstream, despite having worked most of my career in the mainstream. So, I was interested in foreign correspondence from a very, very from childhood, basically. And although I was always interested in becoming a mainstream correspondent, really my passion for this job moved from just a passion as a child to an obsession when I came into contact with the early work that Vice were doing in journalism. And then I started to gear my career towards being that kind of journalist, being a sort of gonzo out in the field, giving their opinions, kind of being your own person, not rather than being a kind of, I have no opinions. This is what this person said. This is what that person said. I saw, like, hang on, you could do it this way. I didn't even realize that was possible. In many ways, that's been negative for me, because while it did help me break out and get into Vice and whatever, and then suddenly there was this moment in the mid-noughties, I'd say, that mainstream media was looking around, looking at Vice and getting really pressured by what was coming, and they were like, we really need to respond to this, start doing our own kind of narrator-led documentaries, host-led documentaries, gonzo style. And you did start to see that in the mainstream media for a while. And then what happened is kind of Vice kind of became more of a reflection of the mainstream media, and the mainstream media became more of a reflection of Vice. And that trundled on for a few years while the bottom kind of fell out of the online advertising market, which meant that Vice eventually collapsed, and many alternative places, BuzzFeed and so on, that were providing work for journalists, they were doing good reporting as well, it has to be said, could no longer sustain their own business model. So I spent a lifetime at that point, a career bouncing from newsroom to newsroom, never really finding a way to break out of being the guy on the desk that was producing for everyone else, rather than doing my own journalism. So look, I mean, that helped in a way because it made me learn the tools of the trade really well. I'm very competent with basic broadcast journalism. I know I spent most of my career doing that. But really also I felt like there was never going to be a market for the kind of here I am on the ground, this is me reporting my perspective on this. That was not something that I was going to be able to break through at any of the places that I worked, NBC or Sky or whatever. So I eventually just did it solo. I started by putting my own podcast out after Jeremy Corbyn and his tenure as the leader of the Labour Party fell apart. I just decided to go solo. I put a podcast out. We had 250,000 plays, so it was really like it was. That was much bigger than I expected it to be. That was, it grew in a scale that I didn't realize that, I had, that I could at least reach that kind of reach for something that wasn't, me. Everything up to that point had been me writing or producing for other things. It's not like I'd never had work go viral or whatever before, but it was always because it was published on Vice or published in the New Statesman or published, wherever. So then the Ukraine war crisis started happening, and actually that's not true. What I wanted to do originally was go to Afghanistan before the US withdrawal, because I sensed a total disaster incoming. And my instincts were correct, but my failure to obtain a visa from the Afghan embassy led to it happening before I'd actually managed to get my visa and to go there. It happened also quickly. So that was the first story I wanted to go report on solo. And then that didn't happen. And the next thing, obviously the Ukraine crisis was bubbling up in the background, as it trickled into late September, October, November. By December, everyone was like, what's going on here? And I very much at that point felt like this is it, the war is going to happen. My instincts on these things tend to be correct, but I don't want to say that I'm, some kind of I have insights that other people don't. I just have a good eye for what is credible intelligence and what isn't credible intelligence generally. And that's not always perfect. Sometimes it is a hit or miss, but I very much was of the belief that there was an imminent invasion of Ukraine, that Russia was about to invade Ukraine, and that I wanted to fly to Ukraine and report that story firsthand because, for one thing, a lot of people didn't believe me that Russia was about to invade Ukraine. A lot of people in Ukraine didn't believe me that Russia was about to invade Ukraine. A lot of people as well didn't think that they would go anywhere near Kyiv. Whereas the moment I got here, I was telling people who were going east, I was saying, you want to stay here. This is where the story is going to be. And, sadly, I was proved right. It wasn't, I would much rather have had February 2022 not happen, had me have to spend 2 weeks in Kiev for no reason and me to go home and try to drum up work elsewhere. That would be the ideal. People portray war journalists often as kind of, wanting war to happen, and it's the opposite, the absolute opposite. I did not want Ukraine to be invaded, and yeah, part of why I feel so passionately about all of this is because I didn't want Ukraine to be invaded, and because I thought that invading Ukraine was completely outrageous, and that's why I felt like Ukrainians deserved my full attention, and to do whatever I could with what little platform I had to try and raise awareness for their cause.
And of course, I've noticed in parts of the mainstream media there are swings from outright pessimism to perhaps over-optimism. We had during the run-up to the counteroffensive in 2023 a huge optimism, which in some ways was also fueled by the Ukrainian government, but whipped up incredibly in some portions of the media. And then, of course, when that failed to achieve the results that people had placed on it, led to a swing in the other direction. Now we have Kursk, which has brought Ukraine back into the media. And we have a mixed bag of analysis going on there. From many sort of geopolitical experts, branding it as a sideshow, a mistake, etc. And yet it seemed to have had a huge impact on the optimism within the Ukrainian armed forces and indeed many civilians. But underneath it, Ukrainians must be incredibly tired, incredibly exhausted, and of course aware now that so many families, there's barely a family that doesn't have a member who is missing or in the armed forces or who's been killed. It must be incredibly hard to remain optimistic and, as a reporter, to try to be objective when so much is happening to so many people that is of such a tragic nature.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's this stuff is never hard for me because I don't find it hard to express emotion or give a political opinion, for better or worse. As I said, my life would have been much easier had I never expressed any political opinions and just, continued to climb my way up the corporate media ladder, until I was in a position of power to choose my words carefully and continue to present myself as neutral and try and influence people with the stories that I choose to tell and how I choose to tell them. That's what all journalists do, whether they're trying to pretend that they are always objectively neutral on every conflict or not. The thing is, I've never been someone who has been able to keep my mouth shut. That's just something about me that I don't really play well with authority generally as well. I don't like being told to do something that I think is objectively wrong to do. So yeah, it means that I've pushed back against authority in my career, and that has sometimes cost me opportunities. I have expressed political opinions that are unpopular, that have made it so that I maybe losing opportunities again. But I don't regret doing any of those things. I mean, those things have also, in another way, benefited me because they stand me out from a crowd of journalists who are very, very BBC, and they are very successful in their own right, in a way that I'm not. I don't have any TV accolades or whatever, but I have kind of more name recognition now, and that's probably because of social media, which is and of itself is not necessarily a positive thing. I don't think that I'm more successful than journalists who have lower followings than me. Not at all. I think success is measured in really different ways. I just recognize that my kind of, I don't know, popularity or whatever on social media has increased with the Ukraine war. Again, it's been a, I guess you call it a catch-22. I guess it's had positives, it's had negatives. It's it is what it is. It is who I am. There's no point in me trying to uh, try and imagine what my life would be like if I had just learned to just shut up and not express opinions all the time. I think if I think if I'd been born 20, 30 years earlier, if I'd have been in, the that generation of foreign correspondents that was, writing in Rolling Stone and so on, I think I would have probably been a lot more wider accepted in the mainstream press. Again, I am published in the mainstream press. It's not like I'm not, and it's just it's been a long road to get there. It wasn't like I started off and suddenly the mainstream press were interested in having me as a voice. I had to claw my way up to a point of recognition where now my voice is sought after as being a certain type of informed voice on a certain type of conflict. But again, that was earned through years and years and years of studying those conflicts and writing on those conflicts. And that didn't just come over. And I didn't just become a social media name and then decide to start talking about certain conflicts. I became a social media big name because I'd spent all of that time on those conflicts. So again, yeah, look, it's tough. I think a lot of people will see that I have a large social media following and think, oh, this person's really successful. If that was true, it would have been a lot easier to drum up interest to manufacture my film. Do you know what I mean? To pay them money to edit the film.
Social
Actually,
media
trying to do
doesn't
that
translate into paychecks, does it?
yeah, it was much harder than I expected it to be. And look, we did eventually get it done. When there's a will, there's a way. But if you thought that 200,000 plus social media followers meant that the moment I said that I wanted to put a film together that I had immediate funding for it, you're wrong. The other thing is I was able to generate crowdfunding for it, which people who don't have that kind of following can't do. So I will acknowledge that the ability to crowdfund with this kind of audience has given me an advantage that some journalists who aren't independently wealthy may not have, even if they are, ultimately getting their work published on channels in the end, or being nominated for awards that I'm not. Again, I don't want people to get caught up in thinking that social media is the be all and end all. It does have some strengths and advantages. My work is more likely to go viral than some of my colleagues. I'm more likely to be able to crowdfund than some of my colleagues. But some of my colleagues who have more mainstream jobs will find it much easier to get nominated for an award or to get a film from concept to publication than I have had, because I don't have any institutional support. Social media is one thing, but institutional support is another. And institutional support is really, really important for journalists to grow. I've had to earn institutional support from some of my, I think I get on well with the people that run foreign policy. I publish a lot there now. But I don't work for foreign policy, as it were. I'm a freelancer who pitches to them. So yeah, having to do this kind of job, which is a very, very expensive, the money involved in trying to deploy to the field and to pay for a fixer and a driver and to report these kinds of stories is really prohibitively expensive for only independently wealthy people. And I'm able to do it because now I've reached a certain point where I can both A, crowdfund, and B, I can publish in magazines, newspapers, channels that can pay me enough to do so. It wasn't always the case. I had to again claw my way up from a position of relative poverty. Even I was lucky enough to be able to crash with my parents for long periods of time, so not have to pay any rent. But there were long periods of my 20s that were spent with basically no money of my own, because I wasn't earning enough money, because there wasn't enough money in journalism at the time, and still isn't. That's not the case now, thankfully. But again, that was through years and years and years and years of sometimes poverty wages to reach the other side. So I really hope that people realize that doing it without that institutional support is much, much harder. It's doable, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I'd recommend you try and go through the mainstream route and try and build yourself up rather than crashing into solo life as a 30-something.
And the last question here is sort of leads off from that to some extent, because you talk about years of acquiring experience and knowledge. And to me, that means context around the countries and conflicts you're reporting on. And I think it was Joseph Lindsley, who's based in Kharkiv, was telling me an interesting story. He has a lot of journalists coming through. Some are obviously interested in the details, some are not. Some want to get straight to the hottest point at the front. They want to see where it's all going on. I think there's a certain type of danger junkie type character that exists within certain corners and certain quarters of journalism. But one comment that really sort of struck him, and it'd be interesting to hear your experience, he was wanting to explain to a journalist who was actually a friend of his some of the context and detail around the war, history of Kharkiv, the differences between Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers, and so on, and provide context. And this chap just said, look, I don't want to hear any of that, because as soon as I know all this detail, that will make my reporting biased. And I think we both found that to be sort of an extraordinary point of view. I'm guessing it's one you don't share, but is this one of the challenges of certain reporters who drop into a conflict and actually demonstrably don't want to immerse themselves in the detail?
Look, I'll be very, very brutally honest here. I am incredibly honored and privileged to work in an industry on the shoulders of so many giants. So many, just the bravest, fiercest, most incredible people I've ever known. An industry dominated by women, incredibly brave women, who put themselves in more dangerous frontline situations than most soldiers ever see in their entire career in the army or the military. I'm incredibly honored and privileged to I'm not calling myself one of those people. I'm just saying, even to be in the same room as these guys is an incredible, it's the honor of a lifetime. I am also it's unfortunate that I also share this industry with a handful of really bad people, who it would be unfortunate to waste too much of this interview focusing on. Some of these people are bad. They have bad ethics. They are I famously wrote an obituary of Robert Fisk, in which I tore apart his legacy of lies, outright fabrication, fraud. And it's a shame that so many in the industry lauded him and Walter Duranty before him. There will be more Robert Fisks in the future. There will be more Robert Durantys in the future. But I think that our industry is thankfully dominated by those who have total integrity in their craft. We might not always see eye to eye on every topic. They might not always see eye to eye with me. I respect that and them, even in those disagreements. But I recognize that they are a different class of journalists than the kinds of people who think you can just deploy somewhere and not care about the context of what's going on. Our job is to provide context. It's not to it's not running commentary. I'm not a match commentator or watching a football match. I'm a reporter. My job is to report, and I take that very, very seriously. And it's unfortunate that Very few of my colleagues do not, but most of them consider this to be a life and death matter wherever they go, and I'm proud to call myself a war journalist alongside so many incredible veterans.
Well, also, I think that integrity comes through in your writing, not just on social media, of course, and your sort of fierce defense of objectivity there, but of course also in your writings as well. We've put some links here to your profiles and some of your recent publications as well. But now, thanks so much. I think it's a huge pleasure to have you on the channel and to get an insight into some of the challenges of life as a foreign correspondent.
Thank you.